Carly Raquel Martinez was born on June 11, 1979, in El Paso, Texas. Not much is known about her super early life, though she did have a twin brother and two other siblings. After she graduated high school, she started college at New Mexico State University, and her major was speech therapy. On January 14, 1998, Carly was last seen with two men at various locations, which include the Welcome Inn and Jose Murphy's, which was located in Las Cruces, New Mexico. Around January 20th, her family went to the public to get help in trying to find her. On January 30th, 1998, it was reported that a search warrant was issued for the two men that were last seen with her. The warrant resulted in police finding blood in a vehicle, and on January 31st, a benefit was held to help raise funds for Carly's family. In February, Carly's parents ended up putting ads in the newspapers to help find their daughter. One ad showed that there was a $17,000 reward for anyone that could help locate their daughter. On February 19, 1998, an article from the El Paso Times stated that a blood-stained jacket belonging to one of the male suspects was being tested at the New Mexico State Police Crime Lab. The article also stated that the two men Carly was last seen with were not regulars at the Welcome Inn, one of the last places she was seen. At the time, it was unknown if they were college students like Carly. Carly and the two men were also seen at another bar, of course, as stated before, called Jose Murphy's, and later on they also went to a skating rink. On March 22, 1998, the El Paso Times published an article stating that the two suspects were arrested. Their names were Jason Desnoyers and Jesse Avalos. Avalos was held in jail on a $100,000 bond, and Desnoyers was held without bond. Both were held at the Doña Ana County Detention Center. The next day, March 23rd, the Alamogordo Daily News posted an article stating that authorities were still trying to identify a body that was found west of Las Cruces along the Rio Grande River. Police had actually went on horseback to search for the body after being given information from the two men. The body was sent to the state office of the medical examiner in Albuquerque for autopsy and identification. There was no identification left or found on the victim. At this point, Jesse Avalos and Jason Desnoyers turned on each other and started blaming one another for Carly Martinez's death. So it turns out that on January 26, 1998, 12 days after Carly went missing, Jesse Avalos was reprimanded by the New Mexico State University Vice President of Student Affairs for using student social security numbers to access email and internet from computers in the computer lab. Patricia Wolf stated that she had banned Avalos from the campus for 1 year after she received a report from campus police that Avalos was using the university's computers. According to statements in court documents, Avalos said that he and Jason Desnoyers had drinks with Carly Martinez at two bars and dropped her off at a gas station near the campus, which was somewhere around 11 p.m., of course on January 14, 1998. Avalos told police he went home to bed and was awakened the next morning by Jason Desnoyers, who told him that Carly had gone on to party on the mesa, and that he raped Carly and beat her with a tire iron and stabbed her. At the time, Jesse Avalos had a homepage on the internet, and Carly Martinez had signed the guest book on said page. She also seemed to have left a private message on October 16, 1997. Avalos's page was basically him talking about his likes and hobbies. And I do want to point out that this case in general seems to be one of the, I would say, maybe earliest or earlier cases that had the internet connected to it. This is a true crime case that seems to dawn from the beginning of the internet, which is just very interesting to note. So, on March 26, 1998, there was an article that showed how the two suspects were, of course, swapping the blame. Jason Desnoyers told police that he accompanied Jesse Avalos and Carly to a remote section of Las Cruces' West Mesa, fell asleep in a truck after the night of drinking, and then later awoke to find Carly dead. In an earlier search warrant affidavit, Avalos told police that Jason Desnoyers had burned evidence, including Carly's clothes and belongings, after he had beat, raped, and stabbed her. Jason Desnoyers claimed that his story of dropping Carly off at the campus after drinking 3 pitchers of beer was a lie. Desnoyers denied killing her, and at the time he had no criminal record, surprisingly. Jason Desnoyers' father claimed pretty much throughout the entirety of the investigation and the trials that his son was innocent and Avalos was lying. This is something that through all of the news articles I read was just commonly back and forth. Jason's family stated that he was innocent and Avalos was guilty, and then Jesse's family stated that Jason Desnoyers, was the one that did it and Jesse was innocent, just back and forth. Neither could accept any sort of blame, basically. Even though Jason Desnoyers had no previous criminal record, Jesse Avalos did. Avalos had previous convictions from 4 separate non-violent crimes, which actually dated back to 1991, for the most part, where he pled guilty to each case for reduced charges. At least this is what was presented at first. Early news articles stated that the charges against Avalos included embezzlement, auto burglary, and credit card fraud, and he had been sentenced to 18 months for 2 of these cases and 2.5 years from a 1994 case. News articles didn't ever seem to pick up on something else that was just barely mentioned in passing in probably about a year later in the news. Jumping ahead just a small little bit, when the trials were getting ready to be put together, there was an article that was talking about the discovery, basically some of the evidence that both the prosecution and the defense were going over. It was very interesting because the defense asked the prosecution if they were going to use the fact that Jesse Avalos raped 2 people in the past against him. So, apparently, the non-violent charges weren't completely true. In the past, Jesse Avalos had actually raped 2 people. Surprisingly, and there's a lot I won't mention in this video, but I'll say this much, that the prosecution on this case was very shocking to me, and it seemed, in my opinion, I'll just say that the prosecution could have done more and to me did not pursue justice like you would have thought they would. I'll put it that way. Because when the defense brought up, are you going to use the fact that he raped 2 people against him, the prosecution stated no. And I'm very surprised that they didn't use that. But anyway, back to the timeline of what happened, though. So, of course, as I stated earlier, the families to Avalos and Desnoyers would both go on to claim that their sons were innocent and the other was guilty. Jason's father claimed that his son only gave a ride to Avalos and Carly, and one article stated that police knew, as early as January 19th, 1998, so only 5 days after Carly went missing. They knew that Avalos and Desnoyers were involved. Police also found that the two actually ended up emailing each other in the days after Carly's death to discuss returning to her body in the desert. Once again, this seems to be one of the earliest cases, maybe not the earliest, but this is an early case of pretty much internet interaction being used in a criminal sense and being used as evidence against, criminals. But in March of 1998, Jesse Avalos was being legally held for helping to hide or destroy evidence, of course, related to Carly's death. Though his bond was originally set for $100,000, the magistrate, Judge Oscar Fritzy or Freetz, not exactly sure how to pronounce his name, but the magistrate actually ordered for Avalos to be held without bond. In the grand jury indictment, Jason Desnoyers was accused of hiding one of his jackets that had been stained with Carly Martinez's blood. His bond was then set for $250,000, $250,000, but the district attorney actually wanted it to be set for $500,000. Of course, he was considered a flight risk, and by this point he had actually already left in the past. So, not long before this, Jason Desnoyers had left the state of New Mexico after the district attorney wanted to take a photo of an injury on his hand. As quoted, the district attorney had stated, "Then, the next thing we knew, he was gone, and we had no idea where he was. So we issued a warrant for his arrest, and he was found in San Diego, California." He was actually caught because, of course, the warrant for his arrest also resulted in the distribution of wanted flyers for him, and somebody had recognized his face. So, Jason Desnoyers' lawyer claimed that he had fled the state, though, because police were harassing him. And the cut came from an injury that he got at work. So, his lawyer kept claiming that his client's constitutional rights were being violated or ignored. And the district attorney claimed that Jason voluntarily spoke to law enforcement. So, investigators were led to Carly's body, which was based on statements by Avalos and Desnoyers, though they did initially give them a run for their money. They definitely didn't tell the truth completely at first. Carly's body was found in a popular spot where the local college students would throw keg parties. Avalos told police that Desnoyers took him to the crime scene on January 24th, 10 days after Carly's murder, to move her body to another location. Instead, the two moved her clothing and belongings to a remote area, I guess even more remote from where they were, to where they were eventually burned. Avalos took investigators to the burn site, where they ended up finding a keychain with the name Carly. This was the key that matched her dorm room. The New Mexico State Crime Lab confirmed that DNA found on the shower curtain from Avalos' apartment matched the DNA from Carly and Jason Desnoyers. In an affidavit, Avalos admitted that he knew Carly had been killed and he assisted in burning her clothes. It wasn't until the week of March 24th, 1998, that the autopsy confirmed that the body found was indeed Carly Martinez. She was identified through dental records. From what I understand, she had been burned so badly it was hard to identify her any other way. Initially, news articles stated that because of how badly her body was burned, they could not determine whether or not she was raped. The autopsy also showed that Carly had multiple stab wounds, including wounds which indicated that she had tried to defend herself. Defense wounds. At the time, not much really seemed to be known about the relationship or friendship between Avalos and Desnoyers before the murder, but there were indications that the two had communicated on the internet 3 months before Carly's murder. The two men, of course, just kept blaming each other for causing her death. It's never been established, though, how Avalos met Desnoyers and technically why the two decided to gang up on her. This has never at least been revealed publicly. Avalos stated that Desnoyers told him that he had raped Carly near the area that her body was found, then hit her with a tire iron before stabbing her with a knife as she was, quote, begging and pleading for her life. And, of course, Desnoyers constantly, for the entire legal trial too, Desnoyers' family always pointed the finger at Avalos. There was really never any accountability from Jason or even his family. They denied all of it. So one article stated that the two targeted Carly because she was young, pretty, and naive. Desnoyers stated that he met Avalos and Carly at the skating rink they were at, and Carly had skated for a while. This, of course, isn't true because, there were emails between Jesse and Jason 3 months before the crime. But even still, one employee did see the three at the skating rink, and they said that the bar staff asked for Carly's ID twice, and she presented a Texas ID that had her picture but a different name and a 1976 birth date. So it seems that she had a fake ID, though of course we don't know how she got it. And just for reference, she was born in 79, and at the time she was 18. So the 1976 birth year would make her 3 years older, old enough to drink. On the week of March 28th, 200 people attended a ceremony where a tree was dedicated in the memory of Carly at the New Mexico State University campus. On March 30th, an article was posted about how 1,200 people attended a memorial for Carly. It was reported that people from across the region showed up to support the family. On April 2nd, 1998, it was posted in the news that Carly's college had set up a scholarship fund in her name at the New Mexico State University. Later that month, Carly's father had actually donated $5,000 towards the fund. In May of that year, the first scholarship was given, and the second was given later in September. On April 5th, Carly's family buried her at Evergreen Cemetery in El Paso, Texas. More than 600 people showed up. The cemetery was so crowded, as news articles stated, that cars were parked from the burial site to a street half a mile away. On April 18, 1998, the district attorney indicted Jesse Avalos and Jason Desnoyers of first-degree murder and 8 other charges. Starting in June of that year, the case started to slow, and the New Mexico Crime Lab was actually backlogged with evidence from, of course, other cases. In July, the prosecution wanted to have one trial for both defendants, while, of course, the defense wanted to have 2 separate trials. In August of 1998, it was confirmed that the 2 would have separate trials. That same month, the results to the forensic testing were to be forwarded to the Las Cruces Police Department, though the findings weren't to become public until the trials. From news articles, not very much about this seems to have been talked about. Not many details have ever been completely divulged. I don't know if you could even look this up to this day, not that I'm sure why you would want to. But even still, in an article from the El Paso Times, it was stated that Carly Martinez died as a result of multiple stab wounds. Another article from the El Paso Times stated that the prosecution did not want to seek the death penalty, surprisingly enough. They did not seek the death penalty for Jesse Avalos or Jason Desnoyers. On the week of December 4th, 1998, the first hearing for Jason Desnoyers was held, where they discussed the admissibility of Avalos' statements. Avalos stated that Desnoyers beat Carly with the tire iron and stabbed her with a buck knife. There's discussion on whether Jason would choose to testify or not, basically thanks to the Fifth Amendment. The topic of a fair trial was brought up because the local press and media were believed to have made a fair trial or a fair jury hard to attain. Apparently, media bias was too high, too strong with the case. So on December 18th, 1998, the El Paso Times reported that Jason Desnoyers would have his trial in Albuquerque. In January of 1999, the El Paso Times reported that Jesse Avalos had actually been tried and acquitted on a second-degree felony charge of armed robbery 3 months after being released from prison, and 7 months before Carly Martinez was murdered. Some of those early articles from 1998 had stated that he had previous non-violent crimes. This ended up turning out to not be true. But once again, there weren't any articles that talked about the previous rape charges that he apparently also had. This article from the El Paso Times also pointed out or stated that Avalos was to have his trial in Albuquerque because of the media press. It was also revealed that Carly likely had multiple contacts with Jesse before her death. It does seem to be that Jesse and Carly knew each other, and I guess maybe Jason was a random person she probably only met that night. Carly's father recalled her talking about a man in a birthday card, one who helped her with computers at the school lab. Apparently, Jesse Avalos had attended New Mexico State University for 2 semesters. One was in the summer of 1992, and then another in the spring of 1993. Carly had spoke of Avalos in conversations with her twin brother and several of her girlfriends, and she even told her father that Jesse Avalos had offered to help her get a job at a local record store where he had worked. Carly's father stated that her job, her only job, was getting her education. On January 17, 1999, a prayer service was held for Carly where 300 people came. News on the case ended up slowing at this point, and one of the statements that Desnoyers made to the police was apparently ruled to be thrown out. On May 7, 1999, the El Paso Times posted an article that was titled, "Hearing Airs Details in Carly Case." It stated that a bloody shower curtain and long black hair were prominent figures in the hearing. Nearly 4 hours long, the hearing brought up details that apparently hadn't been talked about before. Police revealed that they had seized a ripped polo-style knit shirt, as well as a bloody shower curtain, bath rug, long black hair from Jesse Avalos' house after securing a search warrant on January 20th, 1998. So that was all found 6 days after Carly's murder. Avalos' attorney questioned if the prosecution intended to use any of the information in police possession, which of course that is where they admitted they had knowledge that Jesse Avalos committed those 2 prior rapes. And of course, for whatever reason, this is shocking to me, the prosecution stated they did not intend to use that information. Shocking. Seriously shocking. So, Avalos' attorney tried to assert, though, that the physical evidence they did have that tied Jason Desnoyers to the case was stronger than what tied Avalos to it. The prosecution didn't dispute this, so I guess in a way they admitted it was more Jason Desnoyers than Jesse Avalos. So, Jesse's lawyer stated that there was strong evidence that it was necessary to get rid of Desnoyers' clothes because there was so much blood on them. And his lawyer was quoted as having said, Jesse's lawyer stated, "The only evidence that indicates that Mr. Avalos might have been involved in her stabbing and the interference is that 2 people used them, but there is no evidence to link Mr. Avalos to the acts that caused Miss Martinez's death." So basically he was saying, yeah, 2 people did it, but it wasn't Jesse. So the prosecution actually refuted this by saying that one does not have to inflict the killing blow to be guilty of homicide, reasoning that Jesse Avalos still helped burn the body and tamper with evidence, which is true. Another actually good point, though, the prosecution did make was that flight or fleeing a scene is, admission of guilt in a way, too. So basically, this was actually more aimed towards Jason Desnoyers, where, of course, he had actually fled the state previously. And I actually do agree with this in some ways where, a guilty person wouldn't flee the state, right? Kind of makes me think about Patricia Krenwinkel and Tex Watson, how they left the state of California after committing their crimes. But let's keep it with Carly. The first trial for Jason Desnoyers, because yes, he had more than one. His first trial seemed to have started in July of 1999. I don't know what day exactly. But an article from July 14 stated that Carly had been brutally stabbed to death. The prosecution revealed that Carly was stabbed more than a dozen times in the head, chest, abdomen, thighs, buttocks, and back. There were 2 different weapons used, a single-edged knife and something only referred to as an other instrument. I know I've said this before, and even in a couple other videos sort of about this topic, there was just never any complete proof of what the second instrument was. Early articles stated it was a tire iron. Later on, it just kind of devolved into a blunt instrument. And I know that there is a video from some sort of true crime show about Carly's murder, but some of the details in that aren't completely right, and so I don't know if the blunt instrument they mentioned there is the same. But the point is that Carly was hit with some sort of blunt instrument, potentially a tire iron, and she was definitely stabbed multiple times. I don't believe an exact count was ever listed in any of the articles I read. Jason Desnoyers' lawyer stated that there was only one weapon, and they stated that Jesse Avalos was wearing a belt with a knife, a screwdriver, and other tools attached to it the night that Carly was killed. I don't know if this is actually true, but Jason's lawyer stated that his client did not commit the murder, and instead, Jason was asleep in the truck when Carly was killed. Because somehow he wouldn't hear her screaming for her life. The story here was that Desnoyers was forced to participate in the crime because Jesse Avalos threatened to kill Desnoyers and his family because of ties with the Mexican mafia. So, unfortunately, or maybe actually fortunately, Jason Desnoyers' first trial resulted in a hung jury, basically. It was 9-3, and it was basically a mistrial. What was actually very interesting, and why I say this is actually this was kind of a good thing in the end, is that various articles stated that there were certain pieces of evidence and actually testimony from other jail inmates that were just not used. For whatever reason, the first judge on this trial, for Jason's first trial, actually denied some inmate testimony that ended up being used in his second trial. So, after this mistrial, basically, the prosecution started getting their stuff back together again to try him again. And I will just say, this is my personal opinion here, but I will point out that there were certain details that I felt were just not used and could have bolstered the prosecution's case against Jason Desnoyers. I find it very interesting that the prosecution seemed rather arrogant and that they could get his conviction. I say this because of the fact that there were various details that were just not used. Like I said, the previous rape charges from Jesse Avalos, and of course there was various pieces of evidence that I'll later talk about that just weren't used. I guess my point is that the prosecution seemed arrogant to me on this case because there are various details that they did not decide to use, and I don't understand why. But in August of 1999, new charges were brought against Avalos and Desnoyers, which included rape and kidnapping. So even though earlier articles stated that the crime lab could not tell that Carly had been raped because of how badly burnt her body was, at least that's what news articles stated. But they brought up the rape charge because basically both Avalos and Desnoyers admitted to raping her. It turns out that while they were both in jail, they bragged about their crimes, essentially confessing to everything. So from here, the inmates that they talked to ended up actually being used in court for, of course, Jason's second trial and later on for Jesse's trial, because Jesse only ever had one. So that same month, August of 99, Avalos' lawyers had, for whatever reason, tried to have the judge that would be on his trial removed. This was never truly even explained. But as this never happened, because for whatever reason, Jesse's lawyers withdrew from the case for reasons that were never completely made public. It was never revealed in the news articles. The most that I ever was able to find, the most ever divulged, was that apparently there was a conflict of interest. And so with this, Avalos did gain a new legal team. The new lawyers for Jesse Avalos, or really main lawyer basically, was reported to have been a fighter for his client. And at first it seemed like maybe Jesse could potentially get lesser charges. But this ended up not happening, to put it very briefly. The legal motions between the defendants and the prosecution, or the defense team and the prosecution, was was basically a circus. It was almost, from all the articles I read, there was basically a lot of shit flinging between both sides, and I found it, in my personal opinion, to be immature in many ways. For somebody that was supposed to be defending a murder victim, and then somebody that was supposed to be defending a client that was going on trial for murder, it was almost like as if the lawyers were attacking each other personally and not talking about actual legal points. In November of 1999, law enforcement ended up going back to the spot that Carly Martinez's body was found. Apparently, they found a knife in this area, and in an article, it stated that a metal fragment had been found embedded in Carly's head. The knife talked about in this article was the one, I guess, that had its tip missing. The tip that was found in Carly's head belonged to this knife. The article stated that Carly had been gutted with a Leatherman tool. Even though this article states that this knife was found in the scene of the crime, apparently a later article from the trial stated that the prosecution did not use this in the trial, that this was not used as a piece of evidence. Once again, this is another thing that I question. Why didn't the prosecution use this? Apparently, at least that's what the news article stated. It was just very strange. Jason Desnoyers' retrial, his second trial, was in November of 1999. His lawyers, basically, of course, how surprising, right? They tried to argue that Jason was asleep in the truck while Jesse Avalos killed Carly solely. So, Desnoyers claimed that Avalos came up to him and said that he had to show him something. And so, in Jason's story, he stated that he saw Carly's naked and bloody body and only helped Jesse move the body. That was all he did. So, Desnoyers tried to claim that he helped Avalos because he was afraid of him. Of course, this was later found to be false because one of the investigators that was on the case was on the stand at the trial, and he stated that Jason Desnoyers wasn't scared of Jesse Avalos at all. In fact, during the interview that Jason had with the investigator during the investigation, he recalled that Jason Desnoyers was very cordial, very cooperative, and seemed to be very comfortable. It was a rather short trial, at least compared to some of the other major ones I've read about, and closing arguments were made on November 30th, 1999, and through December 1st, the jury deliberated on Jason's case. On December 2nd, 1999, Jason Desnoyers was found guilty. It would take a few months for him to be sentenced because, from what I understand, at least explained in the news articles, this was just kind of how New Mexico law worked at the time. And at the time that he was at least found guilty, he faced the possibility of 30 to 85 and a half years. Meanwhile, the trial for Jesse Avalos was getting ready to begin. So, on January 19th, 2000, it was reported that Jesse Avalos' trial had begun. It wasn't a very long trial at all. It was surprisingly very, very quick. And Avalos' lawyer stated that the prosecution's argument was just a case of maybes. Jesse's defense tried to argue catch this. Jesse's lawyers tried to argue that he was asleep in the car, and Jason Desnoyers was the one that killed Carly completely. What happened here is they just switched places. It's laughable. It is laughably bad how they just used the same story and switched places. So, Avalos' lawyer stated that they felt the prosecution did not meet their burden of proof for the case and ended up not calling a single witness for Jesse Avalos. From what it appears, I really couldn't find complete confirmation, but it does not seem that Jesse Avalos went on the stand either. So he never even spoke for himself. By February 3rd, 2000, the defense had already rested their case, and the jury started to deliberate. So that was just barely 2 weeks. It wasn't very long at all. On February 5th, 2000, Jesse Avalos was found guilty. The jury deliberated for apparently 9.5 hours. Apparently, he showed no emotion when the verdict was read. At the time, news articles stated that he had faced life in prison plus 100 years. Jesse Avalos and Jason Desnoyers would not be sentenced until April of that year, 2000. Jesse Avalos was sentenced to life in prison plus 62 years. He apparently told the court, "I'm sorry that she died. These are the actions of a coward and not a man. I wish I would have come forward right away." He did apologize for burning her clothing and destroying other evidence. He also admitted to knowing where her body was all along, and was quoted as having said, "I wish I would have taken police there sooner. Some friend I was." Jason Desnoyers was actually sentenced a week earlier, on April 21st, 2000. He was given life in prison plus 34.5 years. I'm not sure exactly why he got just a little bit less time, but they're both in for life. Most telling, though, was how he did not apologize. Instead, Jason Desnoyers was quoted as having said, "I feel guilty, but not for Carly Martinez. I feel guilty for being in the wrong place at the wrong time." The day after Jason was sentenced to life in prison, his father passed away from a heart attack. Jesse Avalos actually ended up in the news again just a few days later, or a week later, on May 6th, 2000, for escaping his jail cell with another inmate, and apparently they went on a rampage. That caused thousands of dollars worth of damage, which was at the Doña Ana County Detention Center. They had apparently used a fire extinguisher and smashed at least 25 windows in the unit, which was estimated at about $3,700 worth of damage. There was some talk that Jason Desnoyers could potentially get another trial, but this never happened. Avalos and Desnoyers would try to get their cases appealed, but their convictions were upheld in 2002. In 2010, Jason Desnoyers created a death metal album with other inmates in the prison he was at, of which one other one was a convicted murderer. It is unknown who makes any money from this album. I'm not sure in some ways why it's even available. But as of 2026, both Jason Desnoyers and Jesse Avalos are still alive and incarcerated in New Mexico. From what I could see, they seem to be in separate prisons, at least as I record this. After Carly's death, her family would hold an awareness walk or race every year, basically a sexual assault awareness. These walks or runs for awareness would usually be in November of every year they were held, and it seems that they lasted for about 10 years. I couldn't find any more ads for them past the year 2008. In 2001, there was an article from one of Carly's aunties who was apparently going to write a book about her. It's unknown, though, if this book ever came to fruition or was massively available to the public, because I just couldn't find any more information about this. Finally, though, there are a few Find a Grave pages for Carly, and the earliest seems to date back to the year 2000. I've kind of tried to help clean this up a little bit. I've tried to consolidate it myself, but I don't exactly want to edit anything without having visited her in the cemetery first. As stated before, Carly Martinez was buried at Evergreen Cemetery in El Paso, Texas. This is really hard for me to say, but she was only 18 years old.